Welcome back to another episode of Be Kind Connects. I'm your host, Shabnam Islam. So what do you think about when I say Gen Z 2023? While the average teenager is mastering TikTok dances, our guest today is definitely not your average teenager. On today's episode, we bring you the incredibly intelligent and tenacious youth activist, Marielle Williamson. Now, as a recent graduate from Eagle Rock High School, where Marielle is most notably known for being prohibited for handing out literature regarding the disadvantages of consuming dairy milk, unless she also provided information on its benefits. Well, as an ethical vegan, you can see she didn't want to do that. And as a result, she joined the Physicians Committee of Responsible Medicine to file a lawsuit against the USDA, the LAUSD, and the LAUSD administration for violating her free speech rights. Welcome to the show, Marielle.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, you've done so much in your 18 years on this planet in such a short amount of time, because I think you only went vegan 3 years ago, right? 3 or 4 years ago?
That's right, 3 years.
So I'd like to hear your story of why you went vegan, when you went vegan, what prompted this change for you?
Well, it was during the pandemic. I had just turned 15, and I happened to come across a TED Talk on my YouTube by Earthling Ed on the ostrich effect, which essentially talked about how when we're confronted with troubling information that upsets us and requires us to change, we look away and we bury our heads in the sand like ostriches. But Ed Winters, the speaker, specifically referenced our food system and the dairy industry and the egg industry. And I was already vegetarian for a few years for the animals. And when I learned about this, I didn't want to give up the foods that I loved, but I didn't want to bury my head in the sand. And from there, it was just documentaries and videos and sharing them with family and talks, and I've never gone back.
I love that you talk about your family just briefly there, because we know that for behavior change to actually occur, evidence is showing that having social support is incredibly beneficial. So could you talk a little bit about your family unit and the social support that you found there, or is that something that you inspired in your family?
Yeah, so I was, like I said, I was already vegetarian, and we didn't really eat meat at home, except my dad and brother did. And when I went vegan, I was very upset and angry and passionate. And it was during the pandemic, so my dad kind of took on all of that anger and just helped me kind of sort it out and turn it into a better approach. And he's a psychologist, so he thinks deeply about a lot of things, and so he started cutting out animal products pretty much right away. And over time, the rest of my family did, and now we don't, my family isn't 100% vegan, but we don't have any animal products in my house.
That's amazing. And so, I mean, how does that feel for you to see the change that sparked from you, the child in the family unit, to actually influencing adults to changing their behavior? So what do you say to people that are like, well, my culture or my family will never do that? What kind of suggestions do you provide them?
I just say keep talking about it. My family was seemingly very reluctant at first, but now they're pretty much vegan. And that's the same thing for a lot of families. And even if you don't think that your family is going to approve of it, you can take steps yourself. You can show them documentaries. You can have conversations, show them TED Talks, and just talk about it a little bit more. And there are a lot of alternatives that are the same price, accessible, affordable now. It's really never been easier to eat plant-based, and making little swaps can show over time that it's really not as hard as it seems.
I love that you say that, because I feel like for you, activism became such a central part of your childhood, right? Like you became, once you got inspired at 15, you kind of, what I like to call is when you first transition, everybody's an angry vegan, right? Like you're like, what is going on? Why is everybody doing this? But when you do that as a teenager, it seems to be a little bit more readily accepted, because we understand that you're growing and you're developing your sense of individuality. So How, particularly during the pandemic, were you able to make activism such a central part of your teenage years?
Well, like I said, I talked about it a lot with my family, but I also reached out to a few organizations. PETA was the first one I worked with, and I just learned about the movement. I learned how to debunk all the different arguments. And I also talked about it with my friends all the time on FaceTime. And I also took every school project I could. We had assignments like write a 3-minute speech and present it to the class. And I took every school project and turned it into some aspect of animal advocacy or environmental advocacy, but with reference to factory farming and animal agriculture.
That is absolutely brilliant. You truly give a voice to the voiceless, and that's why I feel like you're definitely not like this typical teen. I mean, there are other things about you that are not typical, right? You're fluent in English, French, and proficient in Mandarin and Spanish. Like, you don't have enough time on your hands to learn 4 languages. What's going on there?
Thank you.
So is this language fluency something common in your household?
My parents speak French, English, and Spanish, and my sister does too. And my sister is learning Mandarin, and we were put in Mandarin classes when we were very little, which we stopped for a while, but both my sister and I are trying to pick it back up right now.
And so is there anything specifically important to you for learning, to be multifaceted, multilingual? Do you want to use your language skills in a specific career?
Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously we can't address climate change without the discussion of animal agriculture and factory farming, and it's just not talked about. I mean, at the UN and COP27, which I think it's COP28 this year, like the sponsor was Coca-Cola. It's a bunch of people flying in on private jets to talk about climate, and yet there was only one booth on food. And I would love to work for the UN or work on global international climate policy and using those language skills to kind of communicate effective strategies between different countries on addressing climate change with specific regard to food and animal products and factory farming.
I love that, because I feel like, a lot like a medical degree, most children or teenagers, when they're in their teen years, like, okay, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a nurse, and that you're going to have to take this clinical route. And you, on your other hand, are thinking so much more towards animal advocacy, but I feel like in such a litigious way, right? Because you're about to be joining Duke University in the fall as an incoming freshman. Congratulations.
Thanks.
So tell us, what is your intended major and what do you want to be doing there?
Yeah, so I'm actually starting at their campus in China, in Kunshan, China. And I will be majoring in international relations and public policy and minoring in Spanish. But we're also required to take Mandarin courses, which I was planning on doing anyway. And hopefully grad school, I can maybe do law, environmental law, something along those lines.
So, my God. So is this program in China specifically for 1 year, or is all 4 years going to be out of the country?
It's all 4 years, but you can spend 1 semester in Duke in Durham. And then you also get a degree from Duke Kunshan and then Duke University from America when you graduate.
So post-grad, you want to straight enter like a JD program, hopefully specifically focusing on what in particular?
Environmental law or environmental science. So I can focus on like climate change advocacy in my career.
And so, advocacy is not going to wait until you graduate. So what kind of things are you excited to take part of at your educational institution in China? Because, when we're talking about animal agriculture, let's just see that they're probably one of the biggest contributors. So I'd like to hear what you have and what's in store for you.
Yeah, you're right on. Well, I'm working on some projects right now that I'm going to be working on from there. regarding California and Los Angeles and animal advocacy. But I was fortunate to meet with one of the members of China Vegan Society at the AVA Summit. And I went to her talk, and it was just so inspiring and so amazing. And it's a much smaller community than it is than where we are with the US. But I want to find a way to help them get more student involvement and campus engagement. And so hopefully we can find a way to maybe do a vegan pop-up, or maybe within the 4 years that I'm there, a restaurant, maybe a vegan restaurant, because a lot of traditional Chinese cuisine is Buddhist and plant-based. So if we could incorporate that, that would be an ultimate goal. And yeah.
I love that you say that, because I actually transitioned to Buddhism at 3 years into my vegan journey.
Oh, wow.
And I find it incredibly ironic for those who identify as Buddhists that eat meat. And it's incredibly confronting at times to engage in that kind of discourse when you're talking about someone's faith, right? And then their lifestyle choices based off of Western cultural influences. Because when we look at places like China, they're now heavily influenced by our diet and structure from the West. So have you been able to engage with people in these particular types of precarious conversations and had some success?
Yes. So one of my best friends from high school, she is Lutheran, and one of the first arguments that came to mind with her was, well, culture, obviously, but also religion. And she's vegan now. She's been vegan for about a year. And she's also opened my mind to I had a lot of stereotypes regarding religion because of the stigma and the environment in which I was brought up and how it was perceived. And I have a lot more respect for her culture and her religion. And she has a lot more of an understanding for veganism. And now she sent me some quotes, and we've talked about how actually in the Bible it doesn't say you need to eat animals, or animals were put on this earth for us to eat. So I think that's really great. And I think it's so important to reach out to those communities that don't necessarily have a similar experience, or it might be harder to reach, because then you never know, they might help you with advocacy in that domain.
Absolutely. We see that there's so much influence coming from faith-based organizations. And for us to truly instill change in the plant-based movement, we really need to be reaching out to everyone, right? It's not our job to discriminate who we want to touch and reach and bring over to the greener side of things, right? So yeah. I think you could find a lot of great marriage between yourself and these types of organizations. And I'm proud of you for not shying away from the difficult conversations. Because I think, we get stopped sometimes in our fear of response, and hoping that people are we don't want to agitate and irritate. That kind of defeats the whole purpose of veganism, right? We want to be inviting.
Yeah, sure.
So, and speaking of faith-based organizations, you talked briefly about PETA as an organization that you've been a part of. And for those of you that don't know, I saw Marielle recently at the Animal Vegan and Advocacy Summit here in Los Angeles. And we also missed each other at the Vegan Women's Summit in New York City. So I was dying to get her on the show. But when she was at the AVA Summit, you were actually representing the New Roots Institute. Isn't that correct? So yes. Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of work you do with them?
Yes, they are such an incredible organization. They were the first organization that kind of helped me focus on advocacy outside of leafleting and putting stickers on grocery stores, in products in grocery stores, which is great. But I was first kind of introduced to the idea of wow, I could do this as a career through New Roots Institute. And I actually met my best friend, Morgan, who was also at the AVA Summit and who's also passionate. And I still have like so many contacts and friends from that organization. And they're so connected with others like Balanced and Friends of the Earth. And there's so many resources. So if anybody watching is a student and wants to get more into this work, please check them out. They just transitioned their name from Factory Farming Awareness Coalition, FFAC, to New Roots Institute. And they're amazing.
And let's be honest, that's not the only organization that you're taking part in as a youth advocate, activist. You are also a student campaigner at the Physicians Committee of Responsible Medicine. Now, what does that entail?
It was essentially the day of action I was trying to do with the lawsuit. So I was organizing California students across high schools across California to do this day of action. We sent them materials, we gathered different students, and like I mentioned earlier, Morgan, my best friend, she actually successfully did her day of action, and it was very engaging, and it taught students a lot about dairy. So yeah, that was my role in that.
That's amazing. And so you're also a YSC intern at the Plant Powered Youth Steering Committee, and that actually took you all the way to Washington, D.C. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so same thing. It was such an incredible internship. I'm actually still in it. So it's a group of 12 students, high school, college, and we have a main project that we get mentors for, and we get to work with organizations like Chilis on Wheels, Friends of the Earth, Balanced, the Physicians Committee, and we can basically make our project whatever we want. So mine is focused on plant-based meals and LAUSD. But aside from that, we have a DC flying trip where we all went to DC and we were able to lobby for major acts and bills on plant-based cafeteria food, climate policy with reference to factory farming, and non-dairy milk options in schools.
Now, are you excited about building the skill set of learning how to write effective policy?
Yeah, for sure.
You're going to need to, right? Like this is, and it's great that you already have a great focus, but you are also the Vegan Teens Are the Future Scholarship winner. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So what is that? How did you, was this a nomination or tell us about it?
Well, it was last year, actually. It was early last year in, I think, November. And I was doing college apps and I was looking into scholarships, and I applied to that one. And it was like a national scholarship, and there were a bunch of finalists, and I won. And I actually connected with a lot of the finalists, and I am working with one of them. So again, great opportunity to connect with other students.
So it's just further proof that even though something may be a competition in nature, you still have an ability to connect and collaborate and to really build your community in this field. So I hope that when people watch this interview with the tenacious Marielle Williamson, they're more motivated to pursue their life at any age. So thank you for that, Marielle.
Thank you.
I actually want to ask you an interesting question now. With technology coming to the forefront of veganism and vegan innovation, we're really starting to see so much movement in the food tech industry, right? So what is your perspective on cell-based meat or cultured meat as a solution to the climate and animal rights issue?
I think that regardless of like any view on it, it's kind of necessary because people just aren't going to stop eating meat. As much as we want to, as much as we want to sway them with the ethics of it, or it's just not going to work. And I feel like this is an alternative that, if it becomes mainstream, will be better than what we have now. And so I do think it's necessary. I personally would not have any, but I know that like my parents would, and yeah.
I wouldn't either. And I think it was, I think there was also a brand at the Vegan Women's Summit that had that was giving samples.
Really?
Yeah, it's called Ohaya, OHAYA. And it was interesting because I passed by it looking at it. I was like, I can't. I just ethically couldn't, because it is real flesh made from animal cells, and often the serum that is needed to cultivate or culture it is fetal bovine serum. There are companies like Eat Just that have come up with a veganized version of that serum, but still the original cell is from the animal, and we still don't really understand the entire process of what's happening to these animals, right? Like, they're still getting slaughtered at the end of the day. The ethics of it is something where I'm like, where are we going, right? Where are we going with this? But there may be a point in time where we have eradicated all of our natural resources, and it's humanly impossible for us to have traditional forms of animal agriculture. We just won't have the water and the crops to sustain them. And so by default, we won't have the massive amounts of animals on this planet in the future, right?
No.
And so if our appetite continues to grow with our growing population, you think this might be a viable solution?
Yeah.
But you won't eat it.
No, absolutely not.
And that's fantastic. So is there anything that you feel like, if someone is watching that is on the tips of turning vegan or eating more plant-based, what kind of word of advice could you provide them?
It kind of depends on the person. If it's a student and their hesitations are regarding family or cost or that kind of thing, I would say reach out to organizations. People are here to help. Reach out to peers. You can reach out to me. And if you're like an adult and you're just on your own or living with someone and you're kind of swayed but not all the way, I would say just keep reading and watching documentaries and listening to audiobooks, and just kind of like sorting out why are animal products becoming less appealing? Why is it something you're moving away from? And oftentimes it's animal cruelty, and then you ask yourself, like, what do I value more, the taste of this product or the culture that comes with it, or the life of the animal? So yeah.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That wraps up this edition of VKind Connects with the brilliant mind of Marielle Williamson. Thank you for your continued support of the veg economy. Don't forget to download the VKind app today and watch this episode on www.vkindconnects.com. And we'll see you next time.